Welcome to the educational space where emotions cease to be a natural disaster and become an object of dissection. True strength is not the absence of feelings, it is the ability to transfer them from the category of orders into the category of input data. When those around you mistake your calmness for weakness, they commit a fundamental attribution error. They confuse the absence of chaos with the absence of will. In reality, the quieter the engine runs, the higher its efficiency. We begin the cycle, the mechanics of self-mastery. Here we will study how to transform yourself into a system protected from external cognitive invasions. Module 1, The Architecture of the Void, the Law of the Tactical Pause 1. Stage, the scenario, the observation, Sunday dinner at the Harper family home. At the table are Julian, Eleanor, and their old acquaintance Caleb. The air is saturated with the smell of roasted meat and unspoken tension. Eleanor sets down her glass of wine. Her gaze focuses on Julian. "You know, Julian," she says, intentionally lowering her timbre, an attempt to establish dominant acoustic control. "I heard your latest project was deemed redundant. How does it feel to realize that 6 months of your life were simply a statistical error?" Caleb freezes, his fork hovering a centimeter from his plate. A freeze response, anticipation of social conflict. Julian feels warmth beginning to pulse at the base of his neck, a release of norepinephrine. His brain instantly registers. Attack. Goal, social humiliation. Expected reaction, justification or counter-aggression. Julian does not look away. He takes a slow breath. Activation of the vagus nerve. 3 seconds pass. 4. The pause becomes palpable, like a physical object between them. "That is an interesting interpretation, Eleanor," Julian replies. His voice is steady, devoid of overtones of resentment. "Internal monitoring. Heart rate is normal. Facial muscle tone is stable. What exactly about this statistical error causes such an emotional response in you?" Eleanor's eyelid twitches slightly, a micro-expression of confusion, a classic script failure. She expected a flare-up, but encountered a mirror. 2. Stage, psychological scan, system analysis. At this moment, we observe a collision of two cognitive strategies. Eleanor uses reactive provocation. Her goal is to trigger an amygdala hijack in Julian, a state in which the emotional center of the brain blocks the functioning of the prefrontal cortex. If Julian had begun to justify himself, he would have confirmed the status of being weak by accepting the aggressor's rules of the game. Julian applies emotional regulation through cognitive reappraisal. Physiology. At the moment of the attack, his sympathetic nervous system sent a fight-or-flight signal. However, the deliberate delay in response allowed the parasympathetic system to lower cortisol levels. Mechanism. Julian does not tolerate the insult. He subjects it to deconstruction. For him, Eleanor's words are not the truth, but biological noise generated by her own need for hierarchical self-assertion. Limbic response. It is neutralized in its infancy. Instead of becoming a participant in the drama, Julian becomes its analyst. 3. Stage. Scientific validation. The scientific validation. To understand what happened at the table, let us turn to the research of Paul Ekman and the concept of the refractory period. Ekman, a pioneer in the study of micro-expressions, proved that our emotions appear on the face fractions of a second before we have time to realize them. However, there exists a so-called refractory period, a short interval of time after the onset of a strong emotion when our brain is capable of perceiving only information that supports that emotion. If you are angry, everything around you seems hostile. In Ekman's experiment, subjects were shown stimuli that triggered sudden anger or fear. Those who were trained in the observer technique demonstrated different neural activity. Their prefrontal cortex, the center of logic, remained active even at the peak of the limbic impulse. Julian used this scientific fact. He waited out his refractory period in silence. While Eleanor waited for his weakness, he simply waited for his neurochemistry to reach equilibrium in order to deliver a precise analytical strike. 4. Stage, strategic protocol, the master key. If someone attempts to unbalance you, remember, silence is not an emptiness. It is a space for your maneuver. Control, principle number 1, mastery of the vacuum. When verbal or emotional pressure is exerted upon you, your first task is not to answer, but to record the fact of the pressure. Increase the distance between the stimulus and the reaction. A pause of 3 to 5 seconds deprives the aggressor of inertia. Your goal is to make the opponent fall into the void you have created. The person who is the first to break the silence after their own outburst loses the positional advantage. 5. Stage, atmosphere of statics. Julian returns to dinner. The sound of the knife sliding across the porcelain sounds clean and distinct. The light of the lamp above the table creates a steady circle, outside of which shadows and the chaos of others' expectations remain. The room becomes cool and clear. The incident is exhausted not because Eleanor fell silent, but because Julian ceased to be a target. Module 2, the deficit diet, the strategy of information, starvation. 1. Stage, the scenario, the observation. A meeting room on the 45th floor of a financial center. Glass walls reflect the cold morning sky. At the table are Marcus, a lead analyst, and Sarah, an ambitious department head. The head of the fund, Mr. Sterling, studies a report. Sarah leans forward, her elbows on the table. Invasion of personal space, demonstration of territorial claims. Marcus, her voice sounds with sharp metallic notes. The risk hedging report is 48 hours late. Your team claims that the data is being verified. Do you not think that in conditions of current market volatility, such slowness is either incompetence or sabotage? Sterling looks up. The tension in the room reaches a boiling point. The expected reaction from Marcus: to begin justifying himself, listing technical difficulties, naming those responsible. That is, to take the position of a defensive child in front of a criticizing parent. Marcus feels the muscles of his forearms involuntarily tighten. Internal monitoring, verbal trigger sabotage recorded. Goal: to provoke an emotional response and force me to justify myself. System analysis. Justification is equivalent to an admission of guilt. Marcus slowly places his palms on the table, face down. This is a grounding gesture. He waits exactly 5 seconds, looking Sarah directly in the pupils. He does not blink. The data is being verified to exclude a 3% error that could cost the fund $12 million, he says in a low, almost whispering voice. The process will be completed by 1400 hours. Sarah opens her mouth to object, but Marcus gives her no foothold. He falls silent. He does not add a single word. He does not explain why the error occurred. He does not complain about subcontractors. He creates an informational vacuum. Sarah begins to feel discomfort. Her brain demands the completion of the attack-defense cycle. Not receiving a defense, she is forced to either retreat or increase aggression, which in the presence of Sterling would look like hysteria. But 48 hours, she begins, losing confidence in her timbre. By 1400 hours, Marcus repeats, slightly tilting his head as if studying a rare species of insect. 2. Stage, psychological scan, system analysis. Here we see the operation of a mechanism that can be called the explanatory trap. In a social hierarchy, the person who explains is at the bottom. Explanation is always a form of submitting a petition to a superior. Cognitive load. When Sarah attacks, she expects Marcus to spend his cognitive resources on building a complex defense. Marcus, however, does the opposite. He minimizes the information flow to a critical level. Limbic resonance. Sarah's brain expects a social dance. Marcus's refusal to dance causes her cognitive dissonance. The absence of new information from the object of the attack forces the aggressor to fill the void themselves, which often leads to self-exposure or loss of control over the situation. Emotional regulation. Marcus uses the technique of biological detachment. He does not perceive Sarah's words as a personal insult. For his prefrontal cortex, this is merely an incoming acoustic signal with high amplitude. His task is to not allow the limbic system to trigger a fight-or-flight reaction, which would inevitably lead to verbosity. 3. Stage. Scientific validation. The scientific validation. In 1972, psychologist Mary Budd Rowe conducted a landmark study known as the wait time concept. Originally, the experiment was conducted in schools. Rowe discovered that if a teacher waits 3 seconds or more after asking a question, instead of the usual 0.9 seconds, the behavior of the students changes drastically. They begin to give deeper answers, their confidence grows, and the number of random guesses decreases. In the context of adult conflictology, this principle works both ways. Research in the neurobiology of dominance shows that group leaders, on average, use 35% fewer words than their subordinates in stressful situations. The ability to endure a pause and provide minimum information indicates a high level of serotonin-based confidence. The brain of a dominant does not feel the need to talk away fear. It is so confident in its position that it allows the facts to speak for themselves. 4. Stage. Strategic protocol, the master key. The one who possesses information is strong. The one who possesses a deficit of information is invulnerable. Control, principle number 2, informational minimalism. In any conflict situation where they try to force you to justify yourself, use the rule of 3 sentences. Formulate the essence, designate the deadline or result, and fall silent. If the opponent remains silent, do not attempt to fill the pause. That is their job. Remember, every extra word spoken by you in a state of defense is a weapon that you personally hand over to the enemy. If you feel the desire to explain in more detail, it means your amygdala has begun to dominate your reason. Stop. 5. Stage. Atmosphere of statics. Marcus shifts his gaze to the panoramic window. The sky seems monolithic, without a single cloud. In the office, only the steady hum of the air conditioning system is heard. Sterling nods, a gesture of recognition of professionalism. Order is restored. In this sterile purity of thought, there is no room for the chaos of others' ambitions. Marcus remains the master of his energy, having preserved it for solving the task rather than for feeding someone else's ego. Module 3. The Mirror of Cold. Neutralizing Emotional Blackmail 1. Stage. The Scenario. The Observation. The living room in Caleb's house. Friday evening. His sister Isabella sits opposite him, her posture expressing the ultimate degree of disappointment. Her shoulders are slumped, her fingers nervously grip the edge of a silk pillow. "Caleb," she says, and a carefully rehearsed tear trembles in her voice, the instrumental use of sadness to breach boundaries. "Mother waited for you at this anniversary for 3 months. You simply sent flowers and a message. You are becoming an absolute stranger. Do your important contracts really mean more than family?" Caleb observes her. He notices how her pupils slightly dilate when she pauses, waiting for his excuses. Internal monitoring, an attempt to instill guilt through an appeal to family values recorded. Current heart rate is 72 beats per minute. Threat is absent. This is merely a social performance. "Your disappointment is understandable, Isabella," Caleb replies. His voice sounds dry, like the rustle of old paper. He does not justify himself. You believe that my physical presence is more important than my current obligations. I believe that you have become heartless, she flares up, raising her voice by 4 decibels, transition to the phase of open aggression. Do you feel anything at all when you see how we are hurting? Caleb takes a sip of water. He feels the coldness of the liquid in his throat and concentrates on that sensation. I see that you are very upset right now. Parenthetically, the technique of active reflection, devoid of sympathy. You want me to feel guilt and change my schedule next time. Is that so? Isabella freezes. A direct question about the goals of her manipulation acts like an ice-cold shower. She expected emotional involvement, either an argument or repentance. Instead, she encountered an analytical description of her own behavior. 2. Stage, psychological scan, system analysis. In this scene, Isabella uses a classic emotional capture. She tries to impose her coordinate system on Caleb, where he is the guilty aggressor and she is the victim. If Caleb shows empathy in its traditional sense, he will admit his guilt and surrender control over his time and decisions. Cognitive dissonance. Caleb destroys the script. He uses validation without participation. He acknowledges the presence of an emotion in his sister. I see that you are upset, but does not take responsibility for its occurrence. Limbic resonance. Usually, emotions are contagious. Emotional contagion. When someone cries or screams, our mirror neurons force us to feel something similar. Caleb consciously blocks this process through depersonalization. For him, his sister's scream is not the pain of a loved one, but an acoustic signal indicating the unsatisfied need of a subject. 3. Stage. Scientific validation. The scientific validation. To analyze this situation, the key is the experiment by Edward Tronick, known as the still face experiment. During the study, a mother first interacted emotionally with an infant and then suddenly made her face absolutely motionless and devoid of emotions. The child instantly sensed the absence of emotional response and fell into a state of acute stress, trying with all their might, screaming, smiling, gesturing, to return the mother to the state of being a mirror. This experiment demonstrates our deep biological hardwiring. We are terrified of the absence of an emotional echo. Manipulators like Isabella exploit this fear. They are accustomed to their anger or tears provoking a response. When Caleb maintains an analytical face, he transfers the situation from the biological field to the cognitive one. Isabella, like the child in the experiment, loses her orientation because her weapon does not find a target. 4. Stage. Strategic protocol. The master key. In relationships with close people, your main defense is the ability to separate their emotions from your obligations. Control. Principle number 3. Cold reflection. When you are attacked with emotions, do not enter into resonance. Use the formula, fact plus goal. State what you see. You are angry right now, and state what they want from you. You want me to apologize. This makes the hidden mechanism of manipulation explicit. As soon as a manipulation is named aloud, it loses its power. Remember, you are not responsible for the feelings of adult people if you have not violated their basic rights. Their resentment is their choice and their tool. Do not allow this tool to touch your will. 5. Stage. Atmosphere of statics. Caleb stands up and slowly adjusts his shirt cuffs. A sterile silence falls over the living room. The clock on the wall counts down the seconds with mathematical precision. Isabella looks out the window, where the lights of the city flicker in the twilight. Millions of people trapped in the cages of their own and others' emotions. Here, in this room, order reigns. Caleb does not feel weight. He feels only the purity of his decision and the completeness of the moment. Module 4. The erosion of pressure, The mechanics of rational superiority. 1. Stage. The scenario. The observation. A conference hall made of glass and matte aluminum. At the table are Marcus and Caleb. Before them lies a contract whose terms Caleb is trying to renegotiate unilaterally using cornered animal tactics. Caleb slams his palm onto the table, demonstration of physical threat through sound. Marcus, this is a mockery. His voice turns into a controlled growl. We have discussed this for 30 days. You are dragging your feet while my assets are depreciating. Either we sign this now, or I walk out of the deal and destroy your reputation in this sector. You have 5 minutes. Caleb breathes heavily, his nostrils dilated. Classic sympathetic activation. He imitates the state of a mad player, ready for anything. Marcus sits, motionless. His back does not touch the back of the chair. He maintains an active but relaxed verticality. He does not look at the clock. He looks at a point slightly above Caleb's bridge of his nose, a technique that creates a sense of psychological pressure without a direct visual challenge. Internal monitoring. An attempt at time pressure and reputational blackmail recorded. Probability of a bluff estimated at 85%. Level of personal stress is minimal. 5 minutes is 300 seconds, Marcus says. His voice sounds monotonous, like a metronome. That is enough time to realize that your threat to reputation costs you more than it costs me. Let us analyze clause number 14. Caleb makes a sharp movement as if preparing to stand. Marcus does not even blink. He continues to study the text as if Caleb is not in the room. Sit down, Caleb, Marcus adds without raising his head. This is not a command, it is a statement of logical necessity. Your attempt to force a decision through aggression indicates that you have no other levers. This is weakness, not strength. 2. Stage. Psychological scan. System analysis. In this session, we observe the collision of impulsive chaos and structured order. Caleb uses the method of adrenaline contagion. He hopes that his anger will provoke a mirror reaction in Marcus, fear or retaliatory rage. Both of these states make a person followers. Cognitive flexibility. Marcus instantly transfers social conflict into a mathematical plane. The conversion of 5 minutes into 300 seconds is an act of desacralizing a threat. Numbers are devoid of emotions. Ignoring affect. When Marcus does not react to the slam on the table, he performs an act of social punishment. He shows that Caleb's behavior has no weight in this system of coordinates. This makes the aggressor feel absurd. 3. Stage. Scientific validation. The scientific validation. To understand this dynamic, it is necessary to consider the economic model known as the ultimatum game, first described in 1982. In this game, one player, the proposer, is given a sum of money which they must divide with a second player, the respondent. If the respondent accepts the offer, the money is divided. If they reject it, both receive nothing. Research shows that when an offer seems unfair, for example 80% to the first and 20% to the second, respondents often reject it out of a sense of revenge, acting irrationally and depriving themselves of profit. However, players with a high level of prefrontal control and a low level of emotional reactivity always accept any offer that is greater than 0. In our situation, Caleb tries to play on Marcus's irrationality, frightening him with a 0 result. Marcus, however, demonstrates the psychological profile of an ideal rationalizer. He is not afraid to lose everything because his self-esteem is not tied to the outcome of the deal. This inner freedom from the outcome makes him invulnerable to blackmail. 4. Stage. Strategic protocol. The master key. Under conditions of harsh pressure, your task is to become the most boring object for attack. Control. Principle number 4. The deconstruction of chaos. When you are presented with an ultimatum, immediately break it down into technical details. Translate abstract fear, "I will destroy everything," into concrete figures and deadlines. State the mechanics of the opponent's actions. "You are currently using anger to speed up the process." This transfers the conversation from the plane of dominance to the plane of psychoanalysis. The one who analyzes the situation automatically stands above it. Never respond to an emotion, respond to the interest behind it. 5. Stage. Atmosphere of statics. Caleb slowly lowers himself into the chair. The silence in the hall becomes thick, almost physically felt. Marcus turns a page of the contract. Only the dry rustle of paper is heard. There is not a speck of dust or an extra object on the surface of the table. A ray of sunlight falls on the polished wood, dividing the space into clear segments. In this world there is no place for shouting, only logic and cold calculation reign here. Marcus takes a pen. The system is back in balance. Module 5. The Monolith of Sovereignty. Integration of the Shadow and Amor. 41. Stage. The Scenario. The Observation. A closed terrace of a country club. Twilight. Marcus sits in a deep armchair watching the play of shadows on the surface of the water in the pool. Eleanor approaches him. She moves silently. Only a barely perceptible scent of expensive perfume gives away her presence. Eleanor sits on the edge of the adjacent table, a position of dominance from top to bottom. She remains silent for a long time, studying Marcus's profile. "You do know, Marcus, that all your successes are merely an attempt to prove to your father that he was wrong when he called you a nothing at 18. Her voice sounds soft, almost sympathetic, using a deep psychological trauma as a tool for breaching. All of this cold logic of yours is just a corset holding back your fear of becoming that worthless boy again." Marcus does not flinch. His fingers, resting on the armrest, remain absolutely motionless. He slowly turns his head to Eleanor. In his gaze there is neither anger nor pain, nor a desire to defend himself. "Your observation has a basis, Eleanor," he replies. His voice sounds deep and clear at the frequency of total confidence. "My past deficit of recognition has indeed become fuel for current efficiency. This is a biologically justified conversion of pain into a resource." Eleanor narrows her eyes slightly, an attempt to find a crack in the answer. "But that makes you a slave to the past," she continues, increasing the pressure. "You are not free. You are a product of your complex. Is it not disgusting for you to realize that you are driven not by will, but by an old wound?" Marcus smiles slightly, only with the corners of his lips. "The opposite of slavery is not the absence of the past, but its full assimilation," he says. "I accept my emptiness as part of the foundation, and since I accept it, you can no longer use it against me. Your words do not reach the target because the target no longer exists." Eleanor is the first to look away. She came for a reaction but encountered absolute transparency. 2. Stage. Psychological scan. System analysis. In this interaction, Eleanor applies projective identification, an attempt to impose a certain state on the object, in this case shame and inferiority, in order to then manage it. Her calculation is based on the fact that Marcus has a shadow, hidden, unconscious, and unaccepted parts of his personality that he is afraid to discover. Cognitive integration. Marcus demonstrates what in analytical psychology is called the integration of the shadow. Instead of denying his trauma, repression, he recognizes it as a part of his system. When we admit, "Yes, I can be cruel/weak/vain," these qualities cease to be levers that those around us can pull. Emotional regulation. In response to the attack, Marcus does not use defense mechanisms, denial, counter-aggression. He uses radical acceptance. This state transfers the energy of the conflict into a standby mode. His prefrontal cortex does not spend resources on suppressing emotions, since the emotion of shame simply does not arise. Its foundation has been destroyed by the recognition of the fact. 3. Stage. Scientific validation. The scientific validation. To understand Marcus's stability, let us turn to Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance, formulated in 1957. Festinger proved that a person experiences deep psychological discomfort when they encounter information that contradicts their perception of themselves. Usually, we either reject the information, Eleanor is lying, or change our behavior. I must become different. However, there is a third path, confirmed by research in the neurobiology of will, the expansion of self-identification. In experiments where subjects recognized their possible mistakes or negative qualities in advance, the level of amygdala activation during subsequent criticism from outside was 45% lower than in the control group. Marcus uses this principle. He agreed with his shadow in advance. Eleanor could not create cognitive dissonance in him because his self-concept already includes everything she tried to point out. His brain perceives her attack not as a threat to identity, but as confirmation of an already known fact. 4. Stage. Strategic protocol. The master key. True invulnerability is not a wall. It is the ability to be transparent to the strike. Control. Principle number 5. The law of radical recognition. Amor fati. Your shadow is your strongest ally as long as it is conscious. Make a list of your most vulnerable points, your past defeats, and those traits of which you are ashamed. Recognize them as part of your story, as fuel for your evolution. When someone tries to open you using your past or your weaknesses, do not argue. Agree. Say, yes, this is a part of me, and it is precisely because of it that I am here. At that moment, you take away from the opponent the only blade with which they could wound you. The person who has nothing to hide from themselves becomes impenetrable to others' manipulations. 5. Stage. Atmosphere of statics. Marcus remains on the terrace. Eleanor has left, leaving behind only a barely perceptible oscillation of the air. Night comes into its own. The stars are reflected in the mirror-like surface of the pool, cold, distant, and absolutely indifferent to human dramas. Marcus feels this cosmic symmetry within himself. There is no more struggle, no need to prove anything. There is only pure presence and clarity of thought, honed like a diamond. The cycle is complete. The mechanics work perfectly. Final protocol, the zero state. The process of mastering oneself can be represented as the construction of 5 contours of defense, where each subsequent level requires finer tuning and deeper honesty with oneself. 1 contour 1. The tactical pause. You have learned to capture time. Those 3 to 5 seconds that you take before answering are the space where impulsivity dies and strategy is born. 2 contour. 2. Informational deficit. You have realized that words are a resource. The less information you give out at the moment of attack, the fewer levers remain for the opponent. 3 contour. 3. The analytical mirror. You have ceased to be a target for others' emotions. Now you are an observer who impartially classifies others' pain or anger without letting them into your limbic system. 4 contour. 4. Rational dominance. You have learned to dissect aggression, translating it into the language of facts, figures, and deadlines. You have become the one who sets the parameters of reality. 5 contour. 2. Radical acceptance. You have integrated your shadow. The one who has recognized their weak sides becomes invulnerable to blackmail and manipulations based on shame. True self-mastery is a state of zero resistance. When pressure is put on you, you do not resist. You become transparent. The blow passes through you without meeting support, and the aggressor loses balance under the weight of their own impulse. Your brain now works in a mode of two parallel processes. One, external interaction, steady voice, calm facial expressions. Two, internal monitoring, heart rate analysis, deconstruction of the interlocutor's intentions, calculation of probabilities 10 steps ahead. Philosophical summary. Remember, those who mistake your calmness for weakness operate with categories of primitive dominance. Your strength is in cognitive superiority. You do not tolerate or hold back. You manage the process. While others waste energy on shouting and justifications, you preserve it for achieving your goals. Your will is not steel, which can break. Your will is a void, which cannot be pierced. The person who understands the mechanisms of the psyche gains true freedom.